Hello, my name is Karol Kwietniewski and I invite you to listen to the next episode of the podcast of the Center of Propaganda and Disinformation Analysis, Desinfo, about propaganda and disinformation in the media. My today guest is Dr. Pavlo Kolotvin, head of the NGO Institute of Political Information based in Odessa, Ukraine, coordinator of INFOCRIME project in the south of Ukraine, regional representative of all Ukrainian human and journalist rights organization IMI. As an analyst, Pavlo took part in a project of Center for Propaganda and Disinformation Analysis in Warsaw. My first question will be about the beginning of the invasion to Ukraine, 24th of February. Here in Poland, in our media, we saw that some of the soldiers, Russian soldiers, thought that they are still not on the war, but they are on the training. Do you believe that this could happen? Those people really thought that they are on the training.
I think that really it's a very hard question because first of all we have to understand that in Russia there are contract army and also there are a lot of soldiers which have to be in army because of their legislation. And we have heard about these tendencies from the soldiers which were not in a contract army, but Russian warriors who were in contract army, they didn't say that they didn't know about possible war between Ukraine and Russia. Also, I think that mostly people in Russia and Russian army, they have known about possible war between Russia and Ukraine. Really, it looks very strange when 200,000 army have surrounded Ukraine. They were on training in Belarus, but also there were a lot of soldiers in Donbass and near the Donbass border in Crimea, and even in Transnistria also they have an army, not so many soldiers, but as you understand, it was very strange that so big contingent was surrounded Ukraine, and it seems to me it's very strange to have such big army and not to use it. So I think that they were sure that something will happen, but in Ukraine I can say that people, they were sure that something will happen, but till the end they didn't believe that Russia will make an invasion to Ukraine.
I think that could be similar situation like, for example, in Poland in 1939, just before the Second World War started. I know the historical fact that most of the society didn't still believe that could happen, even though it was end of September. So this is kind of similar. But how about the Russian society? What is their knowledge about this situation? What was their knowledge before 24th of February? And what is it now? How the Russian society understood the situation in Ukraine? Because we know there is, like Putin says, a special operation. First part of this operation, the media spoke about the special operation. Now sometimes they mention about the war, but how do you think, how does it look like for the ordinary Russian?
During our monitorings, we have detected that during last year, let's say the temperature of Russian society became higher and higher. I mean that 1 year ago, people didn't talk and they didn't think about the possible war between Russia and Ukraine so much like it was during last year. And something changed last spring. In spring 2021, the first talks between possible war between Ukraine and Russia appeared in Russian society. Not in Russian society, but in Russian media. But as we know, if something appears in Russian media, it means that some narratives will soon appear and in Russian society. And also it means that Russian government also want to change their society and to show that they have to do something in future. So I think that in Ukraine we were sure that it's like only a political game and that it is only for Russian society, but that they will not do it just to make this war in future. I think that it was also our mistake that we have detected these signals of possible war, but didn't use it for more preparation for this war. I think that our governments have known more about the possibility of this war than our society. But I can say that people who are working in NGO sector and in media, as I said, they have detected such signals, and there were a lot of marks that showed that something will happen in future.
Yeah, but I was also asking about the opinion. How do you think, what is the opinion about the ordinary Russians? I mean, like normal people from, I don't say Moscow, but the suburbs from Siberia and so on, how they understood this situation regarding the monitoring and propaganda, which is in the mainstream media mainly, because I believe they take the perception from this part of media.
It's a pity, but the Kremlin thesis of so-called special operation is very popular in Russia, and mostly people in Russia, they support this war in Ukraine, and it's a pity. And also we can hear a lot of narratives that Russian media prepared for their society. For example, about that Ukraine made a genocide against the inhabitants of Donbass, or, for example, that there were laboratories for the development of biological weapons, or that Ukraine should be cleansed of Nazis and Nazi ideology. Really, there were a lot of theses that Russian media prepared for their society, and it's a pity, but Russian society are using these theses, and ordinary people are full of these fakes and disinformation. And it's not misinformation, it's really disinformation. And first of all, we have to understand that Russian government and Russian media prepared all these narratives during last year. Also, they have prepared the next step of their disinformation when their attack wasn't so successful as they wanted to do. They said that Russian attack was like a justified step, that they just made it because they want, first of all, they want to protect Russian world, as I said, but first of all, they did it because they want to prevent the Ukrainian attack against Russia. So it looks strange, but we have to understand that Russian propaganda is based on such discrepancies, and they constantly offer different versions of what is happening for their society. But all these versions usually are prepared in advance for different audience in Russia. We have to understand that Russian society also is extremely polarized today. But it is polarized, but not between democratic views. It's a pity. It's a pity, but it is polarized between such audiences like communists or even monarchists or even a lot of socialists, religious orthodox people. And there are debates not between liberals or Democrats and communists. There are debates between communists and monarchists and so on and so on. It sounds awful in 21st century. It's like debates of the beginning of 20th century, but it is reality of Russian society of nowadays. And Russian propaganda, they are preparing different variants, different versions for these different audiences. So, for example, for monarchists, they prepared a version that they have to attack Ukraine because it was a part of Russian Empire. For communists, because it was a part of USSR. For religious people, they are preparing another propaganda that Ukraine is full of Satanists. It is a real news from Russian that Ukraine is full of Satanists, and you can find last news about such messages in Russian medias. Also, you can find news about Constantinople Patriarch and its influence in Orthodox Church in Ukraine, and Russia have to do something with it. So, there are different versions and different views, and Russian propaganda, they understand their society. They did a great work about understanding of Russian society, and there is no of such understanding in Western world. European experts, they do not understand Russia at all because they can't believe that there are full of patriots and monarchies, and really also it's a pity, but Russia is full of nationalists. And sometimes it seems to me that these nationalists are very close to Nazis. You can find in Wikipedia even articles about Russism. It's like something very close to fascism, but according to Russian reality. And it's very important to understand all these audiences if we want to understand the Russian propaganda and why there are a lot of versions of what is happening in Russian media.
Okay, you mentioned about a few characteristics, I believe, of disinformation and propaganda in Russia and outside Russia. Could you say what's like 3 or 5 main characteristics more about how the propaganda and disinformation work? Because I know that you have quite big experience in that monitoring about the Russian information space. Also in our project from last year, how does it look like from your perspective? One of them you just mentioned is pointing to people different things about the, for example, Ukraine. So like you said, this one is for the fascists, this one is for liberals, and so on and so forth. And what's other characteristic about the propaganda? How does it work?
Also, they want to share, not to share, but they want to make a great fear in Ukrainian society and in Western society. Also, they are trying to corrupt officials from different ministers or medias or NGOs in the West countries. Also, it seems to me that Western world even do not know and they do not understand how many people were corrupted in Europe Union or in other countries of Western world. Also, they are trying to show the weakness of Western society, and also they are trying to use the bugs, system of freedom of speech of Western world, and errors of system of European values in European Union. They understand that freedom of speech is very important for citizens of the European Union, but they have understood how to use these bugs and how to destroy this system from the inside. I mean that they have detected how to use these errors, as I said, and that European society do not know how to protect themselves even from this freedom of speech, as I said, because it's very hard to close TV, pro-Russian TV channels in any European Union country now. So in Ukraine we did it. So we have closed pro-Russian TV channels, and it looks like we are against freedom of speech, but of course we are just trying to win this hybrid war. It's very important to understand that if you want to win this hybrid war, you have to use asymmetric methods of this war. And asymmetric methods of this war is also to understand these bugs and errors of European system of human rights or freedom of speech, and to understand how Russia is using that, and then to do something. I think that example of Ukraine is quite good. As for me, you can use this experience in European Union, and even I know that I don't remember how does it call. In the United States, you can find a new department against the disinformation, and Ukrainian became a director of this department. It seems to me that the United States have understood that Ukrainians at the current moment are good specialists in this topic and can help the Western world to be more effective during this hybrid war.
Let's go back to Ukraine, because I know this is the main point of your research. How do you describe the picture of Ukraine change over time, going back to 2014 from the annexation of Crimea And to these days, I mean, also regarding to the 24th of February, how was the picture of Ukraine in the Russian media? Because you mentioned also that it changed, but how is it exactly look like?
So first of all, there were some theses like Ukraine planned to take back the occupied part of Donbass by force of, that Ukraine is going to use the army against the occupied territories. Russian media used these topics during last 8 years. And they didn't change this narrative during last months, but now they are showing that we said about that Ukraine is going to use army as we said it 8 years ago, and you can find it now. Also it seems to me that Russia and Russian propaganda became more aggressive against Ukraine. So in the beginning of this war in 2014, they were more friendly to Ukraine. It sounds strange, but they said that Ukraine do not need Crimea, or even we helped Ukraine that we have taken Donbass from Ukraine. But now I think that it looks strange, and also these tendencies have changed. Now they are not so friendly to Ukraine as you see, and they are very aggressive. And I think that also, first of all, it happened because Russian society have changed. They have become more aggressive inside Russia, and their regime became more aggressive. And if 8 years ago their regime was more authoritarian, but now they are absolutely totalitarian. And according to these changes, also Russian propaganda have changed.
You mentioned that the Russian society changed to more aggressive. You think it was because of the propaganda, or the society changed the propaganda? What is the vectors?
It seems to me that, first of all, propaganda had changed society. And it seems to me that Putin and his propaganda, they wanted to find people in their society which will support them. And they have found such people between, as I said, communists, monarchists, socialists, religious people. So they have found these people. They prepared propaganda for them, and they made these people visible. And when they made these people visible, another people who were apolitical, they began to support these political vectors, not democratic and not liberal point of views, because Putin and his propaganda and his regime, they absolutely canceled this point of views. And because of that, Russian society, they didn't have a possibility to find another point of views. And because of that, Russia propaganda prepared news and prepared only messages for these audiences, as I said.
On the beginning, you mentioned about that the NGOs and government have more information about the war, that the war is coming. Could you describe what were the red flags, according to you, that the war could happen?
Yeah, there were such signals. It seems to me that from the spring 2021 till the autumn, they talked a lot about the invasion. They talked a lot about how they will do it, that they will attack Ukraine and in 3 hours Kyiv will be occupied. They have showed different maps, and you can find a lot of such reportages about the steps of Russian army in Ukraine, and that this war will continue during some hours or some days, and so on and so on. But when the trainings have begun, all these messages have stopped. And last 2 months, they talked only about the peace, that the war is impossible, that nothing will happen. But the Russian army was very close to Ukraine. And as I said, as we have detected before, the Russian propaganda is based on such discrepancies. So first of all, they are showing that the war soon will start, and next week they can show that it's impossible that it will be a war between Ukraine and Russia. But I think when training had started, it was absolutely visible that physical attack will start. I can say that I didn't wait for this war in February. I think that it will be a little bit later in March or in April, but they have started it in February. I can say that one day before the attack, on the main TV channels, you can find a lot of news that the war between Ukraine and Russia is impossible.
Your organization, Institute of Political Information, which you are head of, monitor Russian activities in Ukraine. What are the characteristics and what are the main symptoms of that?
First of all, like they did in Russia, they also have studied our audience and our society. They have understand that our society also have its own clusters. But of course, we do not have monarchies here and a lot of communists. We have another audiences like pro-European people, pro-Russian. Before the war, we had also quite big percent of pro-Russian people, about 15, I think, because I can say because of the results of last elections. And also we have different part of religious people and so on and so on. And Russian propaganda and Russian medias inside Ukraine, they have prepared messages for all these audiences too. And also we have detected these messages and we tried to make it visible and we tried to counter these fakes and disinformation. I think that the main narrative was about US biological laboratories in Ukraine. It was quite funny, but they also Russian fakes in pro-Russian medias here in Ukraine. They also have talked a lot about the secret laboratories for the development of biological weapons. And also pro-Russian deputies in Odessa, in the south of Ukraine, they also have talked a lot about it, because one of these laboratories was in Odessa, and they have talked a lot that coronavirus appeared in Odessa. It was really very funny, but you have to understand that there is a big percent of people who believed in that information. And it seems to me that if Odessa was occupied, so they will show this laboratory, and I'm sure that Russia could have chance to show this coronavirus in laboratory in Odessa. But they didn't do it because the Russian army was stopped in Kherson. But as I said, there were a lot of different narratives. And first of all, of course, they tried to show that Russian world ideology is very popular in the south of Ukraine. And they tried to find people and media influencers that will show that Russian world is still actual in Odessa or in Mykolaiv or in Kherson. But I can say that as for me, it was absolutely unresultative. So they didn't show a good result of this propaganda in Ukraine. Also, they tried to show that Ukraine is a very poor country, that it is a failed state, and so on and so on. So I think that a lot of such narratives appeared also, and in Europe, also they tried to show that Ukraine will never become the part of North Atlantic Alliance, that it is impossible for Ukraine to become the European Union country, that it is better to become a part of Russian world, as I said. So such kind of theses were very popular before the war in Ukraine, and pro-Russian media tried to share this information here, and pro-Russian deputies also did it, but it wasn't quite effective. So it was, as I said, it seems to me that there were no big results of this information and of this propaganda here. And because of that, I'm sure Russia have started the war in Ukraine. Because we isolated, I'm sure that because of that Ukrainian NGO sector, Ukrainian medias and Ukrainian government isolated Russian propaganda here in Ukraine, they have started the war against Ukraine. Because they have lost the last chance of influence on Ukraine. In the past, their influence on Ukraine was very high, especially on the south and east part of Ukraine. But all their propaganda was stopped, isolated, and because of that, they decided to make another decisions of Ukrainian question.
Yeah, you mentioned about some of the topics. We had also reports in our website from the different perspective. For example, Baltic states, also Belarus and Ukraine, and those topics about Ukraine is also mentioned in those information space. So this is quite interesting also. But in the project which we were cooperating last year, strengthening the capacity to counter disinformation, you were monitoring Russian information space about Poland. How do you describe the expression comparing Ukraine and Poland? How is it similarities and differences between those two topics?
There are a lot of similarities between propaganda about Poland and Ukraine in Russian media. Like Ukraine, Poland was presented as a satellite of the United States, a country with a Russophobic politics and nationalist government that is trying to rewrite history and squabbling with European Union. Also, the Russian mainstream media promoted the image of Poland as a very weak country, like Ukraine. Also, they tried to show that the European Union also is very weak union. Also, they tried to show that Poland is full of Nazis, like Ukraine. So they tried to make a lot of similars between Poland and Ukraine, and the same propaganda in their medias. As you know, last week there were news about Poland in Russia, and one of the Russian deputies said that they are going to make a denazification of Poland too, after Ukraine. And it sounds a little bit dangerous, because as I said, last year Russia prepared for the war with Ukraine, and they have used the same narratives like they used against Poland. I'm not sure that Russia will start the war against Poland, because Poland is also part of North Atlantic Alliance, and it seems to me that North Atlantic Alliance changed during last 2 months, because it seems to me that 3 months ago the real war between Russia and North Atlantic Alliance was real actual. It seems to me that it was a big chance for such war 3 months ago, but not now, of course. But I can say that there were a lot of the same methods of propaganda about Poland and Ukraine in Russian media. Also, they have shown that there is an interesting moment about propaganda, Russian propaganda about Poland in Russian media, that they are using different experts and politicians to comment about Poland in Russian media. And also they use such methods that, for example, somebody in Poland talks something about Russia. In 1 or 2 hours, they prepared an answer in Russian media about Poland or about the Ukraine. So they also made a monitoring about what is going on in Poland. And it is also very interesting to understand that there are different departments in Russian propaganda who are monitoring Poland and Polish media space. Also, one of the main goals of the propaganda was to spread the opinion that there is no unity in the European Union and that Poland is ahead of their processes to destroy the European Union. Last year, they tried to show that Poland is going to make a Brexit like Great Britain did, and also that they made a lot of different news about the crisis in energy sector in Poland and in the European Union, and they tried to show that ordinary people are against Polish government in this question. And also sometimes you can find news that it is better for European Union not to protect Ukraine because of energy crisis. That it is better to live with your own life and give us Ukraine back.
Can you mention any differences that you saw during the monitoring, during the working in our project and also working in your NGO? Were there any total differences between describing Poland and Ukraine?
In Russian media, there were a lot of news about Ukraine, maybe in 10 times more than about Poland. But when we are talking something about Poland, they are similar narratives and similar methods of influence on the society. So they are using the same methods, like about Ukraine or about Poland. But of course, Poland is not the main topic in Russian medias now. And in Russian medias 3 or 4 or 6 months ago, they focused more on Ukraine than on Poland, of course. But the methods are the same. So just only we can talk about the amount of news about Ukraine or Poland. But the methods are the same. And the same is about Baltic countries.
I would like to go back to Ukrainian point of view. How the Ukrainians, the society of Ukraine, see the war or absorb the war from the position of your media, Ukrainian media? Because, for example, in Poland and also in the general, in the West media, like the main one, BBC, CNN, and so on, there is one-sided statistics of losses of Russians without any information about the losses of Ukrainians. Does it look same in Ukraine, or this is more objective? Because obviously it's not so objective.
At the current moment, in Ukraine, the legislation status of Ukrainian society is like in wartime. So we are living according to the special legislation. And because of this legislation, all the information space also is under control of government and under control of special forces, which are working with media sector and media sphere in Ukraine. Our media sphere and our TV channels made one TV stream. So the main TV channel decided to unite and to make one TV broadcast. So it's interesting question because, as I said, because of this legislation, we also have only one point of view on this war. But as I said, during the wartime, it is very important to make such kind of view because it is very important to consolidate people during this war, and it is absolutely impossible to make 2 points of view, like it is according to best values of freedom of speech. As I said, Russian propaganda is using these values very good, and they are trying to show that if Ukrainian society will not know about the statistic of Russian statistics, it shows that Ukrainian society is not democratic. But it's not true, of course. It's very important to understand that in times of war or hybrid war, it is also possible to use not a propaganda, but to use another methods of influence on the society. So in Ukraine, we do not have any statistics, another statistics, not from our army, of course. All the information about army is under control, but I do not know any journalist who is against these rules or these laws. Everybody here understands that now is the wartime and we have to consolidate, and it is very important to make information which is more important for Ukraine now.
To describe it maybe more, I would like to ask you, how much time does it take in mainstream media, TV channels, saying about the war, the broadcast about the war? What's the time? Because, for example, in Poland, in the first weeks, there was really a lot of time speaking about the Ukraine and the war, what's going on. And now it's going lower. How does it look like in Ukraine?
In Ukraine, we have a lot of news about the war. It seems to me that all the time we have a lot of news, but we are talking not only about the bombing or missile attacks. Also, there are a lot of other topics about the volunteers, about the peace life, and about the life in the territories which were deoccupied. There are a lot of topics during the wartime, not only about the attacks or invasion. But as I said, all the information about the war now are under control of special media departments. And you have to, if you want to visit territories of the war, you need to talk with special press officers, and they will show you the way, and they will be with you during the reporting. But as I said, it is very important during the wartime. But as I said, the war in Ukraine is still in a very active phase. So the amount of dead soldiers and rocket and missile attacks still is very high. So every day the amount, like it was in the beginning of this war, and because of that, till this time in Ukraine we have the same amount of news about the war like it was in the beginning. Maybe a little bit less than it was in the beginning, but as I said, just another topics about the war.
And the last question will be about the further actions, about the future. I mean, the nearest future, I believe. What will be the further action of the Russian propaganda machine in Ukraine? Could you point any changes, or it will be the same as it is now, or it was a few months ago even?
It seems to me that we have isolated Russian propaganda in Russia. So this propaganda is not so active now in Ukraine. But sometimes you can find new narratives, and one of the most important narrative and more active narrative is about the corn, about the grain. So the last propaganda and the last thesis of Russian propaganda, which we have detected here in Ukraine, was about the corn and grain in Ukraine, because they are trying to show that Ukraine is selling corn and grain, and next year it will be a big hunger here in Ukraine. And also at the current moment there are a lot of problems with gasoline in Ukraine, so it is very hard to find it and to buy it, and also you can find a lot of news about it here and in Russia, the same news in Russia and Ukraine, that Ukrainian citizens, they do not have a possibility to buy gasoline because they have started a war against Russia, against Russia or Donbass. So new two topics: hunger because of selling of grain and corn, and gasoline. And I think that in summer or in autumn we will find a lot of news about the winter and about the heat, that it will be impossible to make a heat here in Ukraine because we don't have any gas from Russia or from Europe, or the prices will be so high that Ukrainian will not have a possibility to buy it and to make heat at home. So I think the main two topics about gasoline and grain, and the third one about gas in winter. I think the same topic will be very actual also in Poland and in European Union, that it will be a big, not a hunger of course, but it will be very hard to find cheap food in European Union. The same topic with gasoline and with gas in European Union. I think that the topics will be the same.
Dr. Pavlo Kolotvin was my today's guest. This episode was produced with the support of the National Endowment for Democracy. Thank you for listening to this episode and I encourage you to read the reports produced as a part of the project. These documents are posted on our website capd.pl as well as on official Facebook and Twitter.